I don't care if you're sorry, Harin snapped, her voice cutting clean through the soft hum of the restaurant. You wasted my time. I specifically asked for the bisque after my appetizer. Instead, you brought it the moment the appetizer plates were cleared. Do you people even understand proper course service? Doogyam lowered his head slightly. Ma'am, you asked that it be served after your appetizer, and that's exactly what the kitchen did. Harin folded her arms. Are you correcting me? No, ma'am. So now you're implying I'm confused? Doogyam stood at the edge of the table, notepad still in his hand, posture carefully composed. I apologize sincerely, ma'am. I'll correct it right away. You keep saying sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything. I want you to explain how someone working in a restaurant this expensive doesn't understand basic table service. Ma'am, I noted the order exactly as it was given. So now it's my fault. She laughed, short and cold. I'm being told by a waiter that I don't know how to speak. She turned toward the man sitting across from her, expecting him to say something, to back her up, to perform the role she needed him to perform. He said nothing. He was watching Doogyam with an expression she could not read. She turned back. I want the manager, right now. Of course. Doogyam gave a small nod. I'll get someone immediately. He walked toward the kitchen with the careful, measured steps of a man determined not to let them see what standing at that table had cost him. The restaurant around him had gone quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when everyone has heard something, but everyone is pretending they haven't. He pushed through the kitchen door and found Efe Meghan at the pass, plating with the focused precision of someone who ran her kitchen the way she ran everything. Completely. Boss, he said. She looked up. She read his face in the way she had learned to read the faces of people she cared about. Quickly, accurately, without asking them to explain what they would rather not say out loud. She set the spoon down. She said something brief to her sous chef and walked out of the kitchen without rushing, without drama, without any indication of what she was about to walk into, beyond the simple fact that someone on her staff needed her, and that was enough. The dining room tracked her movement. There was something about the way Efe Meghan crossed a room that made people pay attention. Unhurried, certain, the particular authority of someone who had earned every square foot of the ground she was standing on. She approached table 7 and let her eyes move between Harin and Doogyam once, reading both of them carefully before she said a word. Good evening. I understand you'd like to speak with the manager. Harin looked her up and down. The apron, the kitchen clothes, the complete absence of what Harin considered an appropriate presentation for someone in a position of authority. I asked for the manager, she said. Not the chef. I'm both, Efe said. I own this restaurant. You're looking at her. She listened to both sides. She asked Doogyam to walk her through the order, the delivery, the exchange. He did it quietly and clearly, without embellishment, without self-pity. When he finished, Efe was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not hesitation but consideration. Then she turned to Harin. From everything I can see, my staff did his job correctly. If there was a miscommunication at the table, we'll fix that right now, at no inconvenience to you. But I won't stand here and treat him as though he did something wrong when he didn't. Harin's chin lifted. Do you know who I am? I don't, Efe said. And I mean that with respect. It wouldn't change anything I've said. You've been speaking to this young man as though he is less than human, and he has apologized to you repeatedly for a mistake that isn't even his. That stops now. She held Harin's gaze steadily. You owe him an apology. The restaurant went completely silent. Not the polite silence of people minding their business. The sharp, collective silence of an entire room holding its breath at once. I beg your pardon? Harin's voice had dropped into something quieter and more dangerous. The register of someone genuinely unaccustomed to being challenged. An apology, Efe repeated. To him, not to me. You are standing here, in front of all these people, seriously asking me to apologize to. She gestured toward Doogyam without looking at him, the gesture itself saying everything about how she saw him. To a waiter. Yes, Efe said. Harin's eyes swept the restaurant, the tables watching, the staff who had edged closer without fully realizing it. Yihan, who was still seated and still had not produced a single word in her defense, and her expression hardened into something final. I will not apologize, and if this is how you run your establishment, then you don't deserve my business. F held her gaze for one long, completely steady moment. Then she extended her arm toward the door. Harin stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. She grabbed her bag, threw Efe a look designed to wound, and walked to the exit with her back rigid and her heels striking the floor like punctuation. The door opened and swung shut behind her. The room exhaled. Efe turned to Dogyom. He was looking at her with something in his eyes that was not quite relief and not quite gratitude. It was the expression of someone who had not expected to be chosen and did not yet know what to do with the fact that they had been. "Thank you, boss," he said quietly. She shook her head once. "You don't thank me for doing my job. My job is to make sure that everyone who works here goes home with their dignity." She turned toward the kitchen. Yihan had not moved from his seat through any of it. He had watched from the moment Efe walked out, watched her read the room, listened to every word, registered the exact moment she decided the truth mattered more than keeping a powerful woman comfortable. He had watched a restaurant fall silent around her, and watched her stand in the center of that silence without flinching once. He was still watching when she disappeared through the kitchen door. And slowly, quietly, he smiled. But that smile was only the beginning. Neither Efe nor Yihan knew that one word spoken in defense of a waiter would set off a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. Before we continue, if you love emotional Afro-Korean stories filled with romance, family drama, and unforgettable twists, make sure you subscribe to Gray Story Studio and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Now, let's continue. Outside, Harin was already positioned beside the car with her arms folded, and her expression assembled into the full architecture of grievance, before Yihan had even reached the door. She launched into it the moment he was close enough. "You sat there the entire time and said absolutely nothing. Not one word. You just let that woman stand there and humiliate me in front of a restaurant full of people. You humiliated yourself," Yihan said. He said it without raising his voice, which somehow made it land harder than shouting would have. Harin blinked. "Excuse me?" He pulled the car onto the road and kept his eyes ahead. "The waiter apologized to you." He offered to correct the problem immediately. He remained respectful the entire time. He paused for a moment. "You chose to make it a spectacle instead." "He got my order wrong." "People make mistakes." His voice was patient in the way that distance is patient. Not warm, not cold, simply factual. "That is not what this was about. You spoke to him like he was nothing. And then you expected me to validate that." He turned the car onto the main road. "I won't." Harin went quiet for the rest of the drive. Not the quiet of someone reflecting, but the quiet of someone regrouping, reconstructing, already building the version of events where she was the wronged party. She was skilled at that. She had been doing it her whole life. He dropped her at her family's property and drove away without looking back. That night, he sat alone in the quiet of his apartment and found himself returning, again and again, to a single image. Not Harin's fury, not the stunned restaurant, not even the particular steadiness of Efe's voice. What he kept returning to was the look on Dogyom's face after she spoke. The look of someone who had been seen, fully, specifically, without condition or performance. He had spent his entire life in rooms full of powerful people, and he knew exactly what power looked like when it was being performed. The raised voice, the name-dropping, the deliberate humiliation of smaller people to establish hierarchy. He had grown up inside worlds built entirely on those mechanics. What he had seen tonight was entirely different. Someone who had power and used it to protect the person who had none. In his experience, that was nearly extinct. He went back the following week, alone. He ordered from the menu with the focused attention of someone who actually cared what they were eating. The staff were warm without excess, and professional without coldness. He watched the way they moved through the restaurant, easy, unguarded, the way people move when they genuinely trust where they work. He did not ask to see the owner. She found him on one of her evening walks through the dining room, the quiet check she did most nights to make sure everything was running exactly as it should be. She stopped at his table. "You came back," she said. "The food is good." She tilted her head, a small motion that managed to carry both amusement and mild skepticism simultaneously. "Is that the only reason?" He looked at her. "Mostly." She almost smiled. She glanced around the dining room before looking back at him. "I was half expecting you'd come with your date." He followed her eyes for a brief moment before answering. "No, A small pause. Just me. She nodded once. I'll admit. I was relieved. He raised an eyebrow. Were you? My staff were relieved too. That earned the smallest smile from him. I'll pass that along. She smiled politely. I'd appreciate that. She started to leave. Then he spoke again. For what it's worth. She turned back. She wasn't my girlfriend. Efe blinked, slightly surprised. I didn't ask. I know. He smiled faintly. I just didn't want you leaving with the wrong impression. She studied him for a second, then nodded. Fair enough. She walked away. He came back the week after, and the week after that. The host began holding a particular table without being asked. The staff learned his order before he gave it. His visits became, without anyone formally announcing it, a fixture. He and Efe talked in the way people talk when there is no agenda. Short exchanges that grew gradually longer without either of them marking the moment it happened. Food, failure, dreams, family. He listened the way people listen when they are genuinely interested, not assembling their next sentence while waiting for a gap, but actually there, actually receiving what she said. She did not push him to reveal more than he offered. She was perceptive enough to understand that people showed themselves in their own time, and wise enough to know that rushing it usually broke something. There was no romance in it yet. There was something quieter and more difficult to find. Genuine respect, the kind that does not perform itself. Baekwon noticed the weekly visits after the third one and said nothing for a full month. When he finally spoke, it was brief. You seem better, he told Yihan, on the days after you've been there. Yihan didn't respond. Baekwon didn't press, but he kept a quiet, careful note of it. Harin found out through a combination of wounded pride and paid attention. Someone in her circle mentioned seeing Yihan at the same restaurant for the fourth time. She did her research, recognized the name, and felt something ignite in her chest that she chose to label outrage rather than examine more honestly. She followed him on a Tuesday. She sat in a parked car across the street and watched through the restaurant window as Efe stood beside his table, and both of them talked with the particular ease of people who had long since stopped being strangers. She watched him smile, that specific, unguarded smile she had never once seen him produce in 3 years of family-arranged proximity. The next afternoon, unable to let it go, Harin drove back to the restaurant. The restaurant door opened with the force of someone who did not believe in composing themselves before entering rooms. Dogyam recognized her immediately, and his posture changed. Harin crossed the dining room directly toward Efe and pointed at her with the confidence of someone who had never been told that pointing was rude. You? I knew it. You've been going after him since that first night. Lower your voice, Efe said. I will not lower. First of all, Efe said, with the same unshakable calm she had produced the first night. Whatever your relationship is with him, it doesn't give you the right to come into my restaurant and create another scene. She let that land for a moment. Second, every single time you come into this restaurant, you come looking for trouble instead of food. I'm starting to think you've never actually been hungry in your life. The table nearest them was fighting very hard to keep straight faces. If you have a problem with Mr. Kwan, settle it with Mr. Kwan. Efe said, Don't come into my restaurant expecting me to be part of it. Harin left, but she did not let it go. Harin without a plan was dangerous. Harin with wounded pride and time to think was something else entirely. The next morning, Yihan asked Harin to meet him. She arrived wearing a smile that disappeared the moment she saw his expression. So, she said, have you finally come to apologize? No. The single word landed heavily between them. I asked you here because this ends today. Her smile faded completely. What ends? This. He gestured quietly between them. The calls, the dinners, our family's expectations, all of it. She stared at him. You're ending this because of her? I'm ending this because I should have done it a long time ago. Her voice hardened. You think she'll ever fit into your world? That isn't your concern. You'll regret this. I don't think I will. She took one step closer. My family will never accept her. Yihan met her gaze without flinching. Then they'll have to learn. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said quietly, I genuinely hope you find someone who chooses you, because they love you. Not because they're expected to. Then he turned and walked away. Harin stood frozen. For the first time, she realized she hadn't just lost an argument. She had lost him. Harin found the crack she was looking for. It had a name. Seo Haewon had been assistant manager for 4 years. She had a business degree, long hours, real ability, and the specific quiet ache of someone who believed she was being overlooked in the place where she was most present. She loved Efe genuinely. She also resented her genuinely. Both things had lived side by side for 4 years, and she had spent those 4 years pretending only one of them was real. Harin did not open with money. She opened with recognition, told Haewon quietly, precisely, that it was obvious to anyone paying real attention where the intelligence behind the restaurant actually lived. It was the kind of false validation that works not because it is flattering, but because it is specific, because it finds the exact shape of what someone has been wanting to hear and pours itself into that shape perfectly. The money came later, once the door was already open. Within 2 weeks, Haewon was leaking supplier contracts, then reservation data. She filed anonymous complaints to the licensing board, vague but persistent, the kind that accumulated in a file and created friction without producing immediate action. She destroyed a key supplier relationship disguised as a pricing dispute. She deleted 3 weeks of advance bookings during the restaurant's highest revenue season and replaced them with nothing. Efe noticed the restaurant slowing before she could understand why. Revenue dipped. A supplier she had worked with for 2 years became unreliable in ways that had no precedent. Reviews appeared online, describing experiences she couldn't match to specific evenings, too vague to disprove, specific enough to read as credible. She worked harder. She restructured the booking system. She answered every complaint personally. She said nothing to her staff about the trouble, because she refused to frighten them before she had answers. That night, long after everyone had gone home, Do-gyum returned to the dining room after forgetting his phone. The office light was still on. He knocked gently. Efe looked up from a mountain of invoices. "You haven't gone home?" She smiled tiredly. "Not yet." He frowned. "You've been saying that every night this week." She shrugged. "I'll figure it out. Boss, you don't have to carry everything alone." She looked back down at the paperwork. "If I don't, who will?" Do-gyum wanted to answer. Instead, he quietly closed the door. Yihan noticed the strain in the weeks that followed. One evening, he asked if she was all right. She smiled. Running a restaurant was never supposed to be easy. He didn't push, but he started paying quiet attention to different things. One evening in late autumn, they stayed talking long after the last customer had gone. The lights were half down. The kitchen was silent. Efe sat across from him with a cup of tea gone cold and talked about the early years, the nights she had genuinely considered walking away, the specific texture of failure when no one could see it happening yet because it was still only visible from the inside. He listened to every word. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "We've been talking for months," he said. "We have," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Would you let me take you to dinner?" She looked around the restaurant with a faint smile. "Isn't that what we do every week?" "Not here," he said. "No customers, no kitchen, no interruptions, just dinner." She looked at him, not calculating, simply looking with the care of someone who wanted to see a thing clearly before deciding what to do with it. What she saw was a man who had spent months earning her attention without once asking for it, who had sat in her restaurant week after week and treated every member of her staff with quiet, consistent respect, who had listened to her speak about failure without trying to fix it or minimize it or redirect it into something more comfortable. "I'd like that," she said. He smiled. "There is something I've never told you." She waited. "I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who respected my family name." His eyes met hers. "You were the first person who respected me, before you even knew who I was." She laughed softly. "I didn't. I know. You were just another customer." He smiled. And somehow, that meant more than anything. What followed was not dramatic. It was better. It was real. Dinner at a small restaurant across the city, walking through a park as the cold properly settled into the evenings. Coffee somewhere almost closed, staying until staff stacked chairs around them without saying anything. She teased him about being too composed for a normal human being. He admitted the composure was mostly performance. She laughed and said she had suspected that for months. He helped her close the restaurant on the nights he stayed late, not because she needed the help, but because it gave them another hour. Do-gyum watched them one evening from across the room and said quietly to the server beside him, She smiles differently when he's here. Nobody disagreed. They had just finished dinner and were walking slowly back toward the restaurant, taking the longer route simply because neither of them seemed in a hurry to end the evening. For a while, they walked in comfortable silence. Then Efe spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Yihan glanced at her. Of course. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The woman who came to the restaurant that day, Harin," he said quietly. She nodded. "I never really asked because it wasn't my business." A faint smile touched her lips. "But what exactly is she to you?" Yihan was silent for several moments. Finally, he answered. "Someone my family wanted me to marry." Efe stopped walking and looked at him. "Wanted? They've been trying to arrange it for years. And you?" He shook his head. "I never wanted it." She searched his face for a moment. "Then why did you keep seeing her?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Because refusing powerful families isn't always as simple as saying no." Efe nodded slowly. "That sounds exhausting." It was. He looked at her, his expression softer than before. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending." She smiled. "I'm glad you did." Without thinking, their hands brushed against each other. This time, neither of them pulled away. Baekwan said to Yihan one afternoon, "You look like yourself again." Yihan said, "What does that mean?" Baekwan said, "Whatever you need it to mean." Ha-Rin learned they were officially together on a Thursday. What she felt was not heartbreak. She had never loved him, and some honest part of her knew it. What she felt was the deep, corrosive fury of someone who had decided something belonged to them and discovered they were wrong. She contacted men who had their own reasons to create problems for Yihan. She gave them a location and a time, and told herself whatever happened next was not her responsibility. On a Friday evening, 4 men walked into the restaurant 3 hours before closing. They didn't bother being subtle. Customers understood immediately, and the room went quiet. One of the men walked directly toward Efe and told her plainly that she had been getting too comfortable and that comfort could be taken away. Efe went completely still. Gyom stepped in front of her. No hesitation. He placed himself directly between her and the man speaking to her, and turned to face the room with his back to her. One server crossed the floor and stood beside him. A kitchen staff member came through the swing door and joined them. Then another, the bartender, the host, 3 more kitchen staff. 10 people total, standing shoulder to shoulder across the floor of the restaurant, in the formation that has no official name but means the same thing in every language. Gyom's voice was completely steady. "Boss." He didn't turn around. "If anyone in here wants to touch you tonight, they'll have to go through all of us first." Efe stood behind the wall of people who had chosen her and felt something she could not have named. Something that lived in the chest and expanded outward in every direction at once, made of gratitude and love, and the specific, almost unbearable understanding that what she had spent years building had just proven it was real. A black SUV pulled up outside. Yihan came through the door first, Baekwan behind him. 3 others spread quietly through the entrance. Yihan crossed the room without hurrying, the walk of someone who had already calculated the room and was several steps ahead of it. He looked at the 4 men. They looked at him. Recognition was immediate and total. "Leave," he said. They left. The restaurant stayed silent for several seconds. Only when the danger was gone did Efe finally breathe. Her legs suddenly felt weak. She turned away before anyone noticed. Yihan quietly followed her into the office. She stood facing the window. Without warning, her shoulders trembled. "I told everyone I wasn't afraid." Her voice cracked. "I lied." Yihan didn't interrupt. "I kept telling myself I'd fix everything." Another long silence. "I was scared." He stepped beside her. "I know." She looked at him. "I just wish you'd let someone be scared with you." For the first time since all the trouble began, she didn't try to carry it alone. Baekwan delivered the investigation findings within 48 hours. The trail from the men led to Harin without difficulty. From Harin, it led inside the restaurant. The evidence assembled itself into a complete picture the moment you knew what to look for. Haewon was called into the office Monday morning. The evidence was placed in front of her without theater. Haewon stared at the evidence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I wasn't always jealous." Silence. "I admired you." She laughed bitterly. "Then one day, I realized I'd spent 4 years helping build your dream. And nobody remembered my name. She wiped her eyes. I hated myself for thinking that. But after a while, I convinced myself that I deserved your place. Efe closed her eyes briefly. You deserved appreciation. She opened them again. But never like this. Efe was quiet for a moment. I trusted you, she said. Not because you were an employee. Because I genuinely believed you cared about this place the way I do. She stood. I was wrong. Or maybe you did, once. I don't know anymore. She moved toward the door. I need you to go. Yihan left without another word. Harin's plan disintegrated entirely. The men traced back to her became a problem her family could not quietly manage. The arranged marriage, already fragile, was formally abandoned. She had stood on that bridge long enough to burn it herself. Her father closed the file in front of him. It ends here. Harin looked at him. So you chose her? No. He stood. He chose character. She said nothing. Her father looked at her one last time. You spent your whole life demanding respect. He paused. She earned it. Then he walked away. For the first time in years, Harin had no reply. The first time Efe met Yihan's family, she wore a deep green dress and told herself once in the car that she was not nervous. She sat at a long table surrounded by people who saw everything she was not, and she did not attempt to be anything other than what she was. She talked about what she had built and why. She answered questions directly and without deflection. She did not argue with skepticism. She simply explained the values she had organized everything around. Respect, hard work, loyalty. Across the table, Yihan watched without appearing to watch, with the focused calm of someone who knew something important was happening and trusted it enough to leave it alone. At the end of the evening, one elder who had said very little throughout the dinner set his cup down and looked at Efe quietly. Now I understand, he said, why my grandson chose you. 1 year later, the restaurant was full every evening. Dugyam was floor manager now and wore it with the precise combination of pride and conscientiousness that made everyone trust him immediately. The staff remained as close as family. Yihan had become someone who belonged in the space in the gradual, permanent way things become true. Teased occasionally, welcomed completely, not a guest anymore. On a Thursday in autumn, after the last customer left and the kitchen went quiet, Yihan stayed. The staff found very convenient reasons to gather near the kitchen door with a clear sightline to the dining room, while appearing fully occupied with other things. Dugyam stood closest, folding and refolding the same cloth. Yihan took Efe's hand in the middle of the dining room, the room where everything had started, where a woman had been cruel to someone smaller than her, and another woman had walked out of her kitchen and decided it was not going to continue. The first time I came here, he said, I thought I was only having dinner. He reached into his jacket. I had no idea I was walking into the rest of my life. He took a slow breath, then lowered himself onto one knee. He knelt. Will you marry me? He smiled suddenly. There's still someone I need to thank. Efe looked confused. He turned. His eyes found Dugyam. If you hadn't walked into that kitchen that night, I never would have met the woman I love. The room fell silent. Dugyam blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. Then he smiled. Only then did Efe laugh through her tears. Yes. The kitchen door burst open and every member of staff came through at once. Cheering and embracing and loud, someone knocking over a chair and not caring even slightly, Baekwan applauding from the back with his characteristic restraint, lasting approximately 4 seconds before he abandoned it entirely. Dugyam found his way through the crowd to Efe and hugged her without saying anything. She held on and understood, completely and without question, what it meant to have built something that was more than a business. One moment had changed everything. Not a grand gesture, not a declaration. One word, spoken calmly in a full restaurant by a woman who decided that her employee's dignity was worth more than a difficult customer's approval. Apologize. That one word sent a man back the following week, and the week after, and the week after that. It opened conversations that became friendship, and friendship that became the quiet, durable kind of love that does not need an audience. It showed a staff what their leader was built from, and deepened a loyalty that proved itself when it mattered most. What began as one woman defending her employee became a story of loyalty, courage, forgiveness, and a love built not on power or wealth, but on respect. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? The first restaurant confrontation, the staff standing in front of Efe, or Yihan's proposal? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Grey Story Studio for more original Afro-Korean love stories, and share this story with someone who believes that kindness and respect can change lives. We'll see you in the next story.